A single syllable of a prayer, torn from bleeding lips, can sound like thunder when echoed across the vaulted stone of terror's deepest sanctum. Down here, beneath the weight of 1,000,000,000,000 souls and the golden monuments raised in his name, there is no light that is not claimed by incense smoke or the glow of sacred machinery. Chains jangle, vox hymns drone, and the air trembles with the rhythm of hearts that do not yet know whether they will beat again. I remember the taste of metal, the sting of ash, and the distant roar of unseen furnaces. They told us that being chosen was an honor, that to give our flesh to the master of mankind was to transcend mortality. Yet in that moment, with my wrists bound and my voice shaking, it did not feel like ascension. It felt like falling. There was a scream then, human, raw, swallowed instantly by the choir of servitors whose throats were nothing but vox grills and scripture-feeding circuits. The walls vibrated with the mechanical heartbeat of the golden throne, and we were told that every pulse was his will made manifest. We were told that our fear was irrelevant. We were told to kneel. If these words find you, hold them close. The Imperium is built upon blood, and for a brief moment one can hear it, dripping like rain, pooling beneath icons of gold. Before we descend further, breathe and remain with me. And if these whispered confessions stir something in you, if they make the underhives or battlefields or shrine worlds feel just a little closer, then let this tale continue its march. Share it. Let it travel across data slates and vox networks. Let others hear what the administratum will never write. Subscribe to the voice that survived the places where light does not reach, and together we will walk deeper. The first sign was not a trumpet blast or the crack of gunfire, but the quiet trembling of the hab-block walls, a vibration, subtle at first, then growing until dust drifted from ceiling vents and cracked tiles shivered under bare feet. Most of us pretended not to notice. We kept our voices low, eyes down, movements slow. In the hives of terror, noise carried like a curse, and someone might mistake curiosity for defiance. Yet every soul in those steel corridors felt it. The administratum had turned its gaze toward our sector, and nothing good came of that. I remember standing in the manufactorum queue, sweat stinging my eyes, the stench of burnt promethium clinging to my clothes. The shift gong hadn't rung, the foreman hadn't appeared, and that silence alone was worse than alarms. We waited, still as statues, hands folded across grease-smeared aprons and threadbare coats. Some muttered half-prayers to the imperial aquila hanging crookedly on the wall, its wings chipped and blackened by years of ash. Others stared toward the corridor arches, listening for footsteps. I tried not to think of selection, but the thought coiled itself inside me like a rusted hook. When the doors finally opened, they did not swing. They were torn apart. Gilded poles swept in, torches blazing with sacred oils that smelled of incense and rot. Robed officiants in deep crimson stepped across the threshold, servo skulls gliding above them like pale, silent vultures. Their faces were masked with carved gold, their lips hidden behind vox grills that whispered scripture with voices not entirely human. The torches cast long shadows across the manufactorum, bending us into silhouettes on the cracked floor. Behind them came the Skitari escort, armor coated in industrial dust, augmetic eyes burning crimson, their laser guns held with predatory precision. No orders were spoken. The crowd simply fell apart, employees scurrying backward until they pressed against the cold stone walls. The officiants formed a line 3 deep, their robes brushing the ground like wet banners. One stepped forward, holding a data slate that glowed sickly green in the dim light. Names. Dozens. Hundreds. The air turned heavy enough to choke on. No family wanted to hear their bloodline spoken. To be chosen was an honor, they said. But no one celebrated honor here. Honor did not return home. Honor did not send letters. Honor did not answer questions. The vox grills crackled as the officiant read, and each word sounded like a verdict. Unit Theta 94, Corin Avel. A middle-aged worker near me gasped, clutching his head. His wife stifled a scream with both hands. Skitari moved toward them, unhurried but inevitable. Corin tried to run, his limbs awkward, stumbling over crates of scrap metal. The butt of a rifle struck his spine, and he dropped, gasping as they dragged him upright. Unit Omega 31, Seren Hale, someone else whimpered. A child cried. The names continued. I kept my eyes on the floor, breathing through clenched teeth, trying to disappear into the dust. I had seen soldiers break doors in. I had seen tithe collectors strip entire hablocks of food and coin. But selection was different. Selection stole the living. When my name came, Unit Alpha 51, Lorian Kale, my legs felt carved from ice. For a moment, the room spun, and all I could hear was the hiss of torchfire and the pounding inside my skull. I did not look up, not until the rifle muzzle touched my shoulder. "Stand!" a Skitarius rasped, voice filtered through metallic augmentations. I obeyed. My mother's hand closed around my wrist for a heartbeat, warm and trembling, then loosened as the guard stepped between us. She wanted to speak, but her mouth stayed frozen open, no sound emerging. The Skitari force marched us out, 27 chosen from the Manufactorum, pressed into a tight column surrounded by steel and red-robed clergy. Servo skulls recorded our faces, the cold lens tracking tears, fear, doubt. Outside, the air burned with smog and exhaust. Terror's hives pierced the sky with jagged towers like broken teeth, disappearing into a grey haze. Conveyor vehicles clattered along congested streets, carrying workers to lives they prayed would remain untouched. Vendors shuttered their stalls. Citizens stepped aside with wide, frightened eyes, clutching prayer tokens to their chests. We were marched past prayer shrines, past shattered arches carved with the Emperor's visage, past propaganda banners whose edges smouldered from industrial fires. The world went silent around us. Terror had a way of erasing witnesses. When we reached the transport platform, a mechanized carrier waited. Black armor panels marked with purity seals and wax-stamped parchment. Its doors yawned like the mouth of a predator. One by one, we were shoved inside, where metal benches lined the walls. Shackles clamped around our wrists, cold and unforgiving. There were no windows. The doors slammed shut, cutting us off from the city, from family, from air that didn't stink of machine oil. Darkness surrounded us, pierced only by the flicker of lumen strips above. Someone sobbed quietly. Someone else whispered the litany of protection, syllables broken by trembling breath. The carrier lurched forward without warning, and the sudden momentum forced us to lean into the restraints. No one spoke for a long time. Silence grew thick, pressing against our ribs like armor plates. Finally, a thin worker across from me tried to form a sentence. "Does anyone know where—" A servo skull descended from its ceiling cradle, Voxcaster hissing. "Speech is forbidden." We fell silent. The ride lasted hours, or perhaps minutes. It was impossible to tell time in the dark, with only the hum of engines and the metallic grind of treads over plating. Eventually the carrier slowed, brakes shrieking. When the doors unlocked and light spilled inside, we shielded our eyes. The air outside was colder, smelling of sacred oils and disinfectant. There were no civilians here, only walls of polished obsidian, marked with sigils that pulsed faint blue. Automated turrets tracked our movements with predatory aim. We were herded out into a courtyard paved with black marble. Storm clouds swirled above, lit by the distant golden radiance of the Imperial Palace. Even from miles away, the glow seemed unnatural, like a star that refused to die. We could hear it faintly. The echo of hymns carried on mechanical vox, layered with machine choir harmonics. Terror never truly slept. Faith did not permit it. From the courtyard, we marched toward a towering archway guarded by statues of custodian warriors. Their golden armor gleamed like fire against the grey haze, their visors dark and impenetrable. None of them moved, but their stillness was worse than hostility. They watched, silent as death, as we were funneled inside. The interior was a cathedral of glass and iron, vaulted ceilings arching like ribs over a massive central chamber. Thousands of candles flickered atop metal altars, their flames trembling as though afraid. Officiants lined the aisles, chanting in low tones. A massive stone aquila dominated the far wall, wings outstretched, eyes carved with impossible precision. Beneath it, a staircase spiraled downward into unseen depths. We were separated into groups and processed through a checkpoint. Our identities were scanned, our clothing stripped, our possessions tossed aside. Metal tags were fixed to our collars. Medical servitors leaned close, their mechadendrites probing our eyes, mouths, and veins with needles that burned like fire. A few fainted, wrists still chained. collapsing into the arms of silent guards who dragged them onward without pause. I tried to speak, to ask why we had been chosen, but the Skitari's visor flared warning red. Silence was law. When they finished, they pushed us toward the stairwell. The stone steps were slick beneath bare feet, worn smooth by countless others who had walked or been forced this path. No one spoke now. Breath was the only sound, shallow and terrified, mingling with the echo of chanting from above. We descended until the air grew warmer, heavy with incense and burning oils. The walls narrowed, torches flickering with an unnatural blue flame that cast everything in a dreamlike glow. At the bottom lay a narrow hall. The floor was marked with sigils, some cracked, others fresh with blood. The humanity in our group began to fray. One worker broke into a sprint, bolting forward with a strangled scream. A last shot cut him down instantly, painting the stones with a spray of red. His corpse steamed as it cooled. No one else ran. We were led into a chamber where massive iron doors waited, embossed with ancient script so deep the grooves seemed bottomless. An officiant stepped forward and raised his hand. The doors groaned as they opened, revealing a dim corridor lined with alcoves where servitors stood in silent rows, bodies fused with machinery. The corridor stretched far ahead, disappearing into shadow. We marched, shackles clinking, the only sound beyond the mechanical breathing of the servo skulls. Far ahead, a choir sang, low, mournful, reverberating through the stone like the heartbeat of a wounded giant. The lights dimmed. The air grew colder. Breath turned to mist. Some of us shook uncontrollably, unsure if it was fear, cold, or both. When the corridor finally widened, we entered a sanctum filled with benches and high-backed seats carved from dark wood. We were forced to sit, guards standing watch along the walls. A priest emerged from the shadows, robes layered with gold-threaded scripture. His face was aged and scarred, eyes sunken but burning with zeal. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ritual. "You are chosen." His words dropped like stones into a frozen lake. You are granted the privilege of giving yourselves to the master of mankind. Your fear is a failing of faith. Your sacrifice will be recorded, sanctified, and remembered in the echoes of eternity. Someone whispered, "I don't want to die." The priest's head snapped toward her. To die for him is to live forever. A hush settled over us. My throat burned, but no sound would come. The priest lifted a hand, and the servo skulls floated forward, casting pale beams of light across our faces. The priest's voice softened, but there was no warmth in it. Some of you will be exalted. Some will vanish from mortal record. None will be wasted. He turned and walked away. The guards moved then, unlocking our shackles only to bind our wrists with rope. We were ushered through another door, into another staircase that spiraled deeper, the stone etched with runes that hummed faintly as we passed. Somewhere far above us, the hive continued its cycle. Markets opening, manufacturums grinding, guards patrolling. But down here, time felt different. Time felt like a noose tightening. We descended for what felt like hours. A man near me began murmuring to himself, a frantic prayer that made no sense. 2 guards seized him, forced a syringe into his neck, and he collapsed, eyes glazed. They dragged him the rest of the way, his heels scraping the stone. Finally, the stairs ended at a chamber lit by flickering blue lumen orbs. A great bronze gate stood before us, etched with the imperial aquila, wings spanning the entire width of the metal. The gate was pitted and blackened in places, as if scorched by unnatural fire. The air vibrated with a deep, distant hum, almost like a heartbeat, or the grinding of machinery older than any living soul. The priests took formation, chanting in binary cant, their voices merging with the mechanical rhythm. The gates opened. Heat rushed out, coated with the smell of oil and burnt incense. The chamber beyond was vast, lined with pillars carved with the faces of saints and martyrs. The floor sloped downward into depths that shimmered with heat haze and shadow. The guards pushed us forward, through the gate, and the bronze slammed shut behind us with a deafening finality. There was no route back, only forward. The corridor narrowed again, and we were separated into rows, guided by servitors whose flesh was pale and stitched with steel. The hum grew louder, and with it came a pressure in the skull, a sensation like invisible fingers pressing against the mind. Some stumbled, clutching their heads, Others bit their lips until blood ran down their chins. I felt it too, a weight behind my eyes, a whisper that wasn't sound, a presence impossible to name. We reached another gate, smaller but no less ominous. It opened as we approached, revealing a final room where long metal tables stood in rows, restraints built into their edges. Priests walked between them, preparing instruments that glinted under the lumen orbs. A single sentence carved into the wall caught my eye. His will consumes all. They called us forward one by one. One woman collapsed before reaching the table. They dragged her on top and strapped her down while she sobbed, eyes swollen and wild. A priest leaned close, whispering words too soft to hear, and her expression twisted from terror into something numb and hollow. Then the machines descended, cables snaking from the ceiling, needles gleaming. The process was fast. Blood collected in steel vials. Faces turned pale. Screams were swallowed by chanting. When my turn came, my legs barely carried me. The table was cold against my back. Leather straps tightened across my wrists, chest, and ankles. I tried to breathe, but my lungs refused. A servitor adjusted my head, locking it in place. My heart hammered, each beat a desperate plea. A mask lowered toward my face. I closed my eyes, and the world went dark. The last thing I heard was the hum, deep, endless and hungry, as if the golden throne itself exhaled. Then, somewhere beyond the void of consciousness, something began. Consciousness returned like a slow, dragging tide, scraping my mind across jagged stone. I did not wake all at once. First came sound, distant metal clattering, the whisper of mechanized lungs, the murmur of robed figures reciting scripture in monotone. Then came scent. The sting of disinfectant, sharp enough to burn the sinuses, the copper tang of blood, the cloying sweetness of incense that masked something far older and rotted beneath. Only afterward did my eyes open, heavy and reluctant, revealing a ceiling of polished steel panels crossed with cables like veins feeding a beating heart. I was no longer on the cold table. Now I lay inside a chamber that resembled no medical ward I had ever heard of. Dozens of beds stood in rows, simple slabs of metal with restraints dangling from the sides. The walls were smooth and silver, without windows, adorned only with hololithic projectors displaying the Imperial Aquila and fragments of sacred code. Lights hovered above us, suspended by thin mechanical arms that pulsed with sterile white illumination. My vision blurred around the edges, like static rippling through a blocked Vox channel, but I forced myself upright, muscles trembling. Others lay nearby, some awake, some unconscious, some staring blankly at the ceiling as if already hollowed out. Their breaths came ragged and uneven, a few whimpered under their breath. One man's lips moved silently, singing a prayer his voice no longer possessed strength to carry. I saw no guards with laser guns this time, only robed medici priests and red-masked mechanicus adepts. They moved with cold precision, stepping between beds to check readings on handheld cogitator slates that glowed green or red, depending on whatever data they extracted from our bodies. I tried to speak, but my throat felt scraped raw, as though someone had poured sand down my windpipe. When I swallowed, I tasted metal. A medici noticed my movement. She approached with quiet, measured steps, her robes marked with inked scripture. Her eyes were kind, or at least they would have been, if there were any warmth behind them. Augmetic implants coiled around her temples, feeding into a Vox grill built into her jaw. "You are awake," she said, but her voice was filtered through the machine, drained of emotion. "You will remain still." My voice came out weak and broken. Where are we?" She lifted a small data slate, scanning its surface. "You are in the sanctum of needles. You have been processed and catalogued. Do not attempt to stand. Sanctum of needles." The name alone carried weight, like iron dragging across the soul. I looked down and saw my arms were marked with tiny punctures, dozens of needle wounds forming bruised constellations across my skin. Beneath them, thin metal strips formed identification seals, adhered like second flesh, numbers, codes, no names. "What did you do to us?" My words were faint, but the tremor in them betrayed my fear. She didn't answer. Perhaps she wasn't permitted to. Movement near the far wall drew my eye. A pair of servitors glided forward on metal tracks, their torsos fused to mechanical platforms. Tubes of pale fluid pumped through their synthetic veins. Their faces were expressionless, eyes void of anything human. Each held a tray filled with silver instruments that shimmered under the sterile light. Syringes, scalpels, vials, and cables ending in needle-tipped threads. The Medicae turned away from me, calling for assistance through her vox grill. 2 adepts joined her, carrying another bed where an unconscious woman lay twitching, her skin flushed and glistening with sweat. They strapped her down, tightening the restraints until her arms trembled. One of the adepts pulled a vial from his tray. Inside, the liquid glowed faint blue, thick as oil. He held it up to a hololithic display, receiving approval from a cascade of green sigils. The needle pierced her arm, her back arched, breath ripping from her throat in a silent scream. I flinched, looking away, but there was no place to hide from the sound. Every bed, every corner, every breath in this sanctum belonged to the Imperium, and it demanded everything we had. A voice spoke beside me, hoarse and quivering. "We're being tested." I turned and saw a young man on the adjacent bed, his wrists still bound by leather straps even though he didn't struggle. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated with terror. They take blood, marrow, skin, psychic readings, whatever they need. They record it all, then move the ones they want deeper. His voice cracked. The others, they don't leave this room. I swallowed hard. He wasn't lying. In the corner of the sanctum, 2 bodies lay covered by white cloth, unmoving. Servitors hovered nearby, waiting for instruction. There was no reverence, no ceremony, just disposal. A sudden hiss erupted near my feet. A cable unfurled like a metallic serpent, ending in a needle array. The servitor pushing it forward moved with jerking, unnatural motions, its mechanical limbs clicking as though rusted inside. I recoiled, pressing my back against the bed. The Medicae returned, calm and slow, placing a metal clamp over my arm. Her hands moved without hesitation, without cruelty, without kindness. Just duty. Your blood work remains incomplete. Further samples are required. "No," I whispered. "Please, I don't understand. Why us? Why take us?" Her expression did not change. Faith demands sacrifice. "The Emperor protects." Her hand pressed the needle to my skin. Pain fled bright and sudden, hot enough to blur vision. I clenched my jaw, fighting a scream. The cable pulsed, sending something cold through my veins, like ice laced with fire. The Medicae scribbled notes on her slate, monitoring shifting runes and numerical values. When she finished, I collapsed back, lungs burning, sweat collecting along my hairline. The cable retracted, slithering away with a soft metallic whisper. They worked methodically, moving from bed to bed, draining, injecting, cataloguing. Every time a needle settled into flesh, someone cursed, cried, or vomited. The adepts did not slow. They did not care. They were cogs in a machine built to harvest bodies and souls. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time fractured under pain. At some point, a man 3 beds down began screaming, loud, raw, primal. His restraints snapped against the metal bed frame. His body convulsed, eyes rolling back as blood streamed from his nostrils. 2 servitors moved in tandem, stabbing syringes into his limbs to paralyze him. He slumped instantly, breath ragged and shallow. The Medicae examined him, shook her head once, and stepped away. The servitors covered him with a cloth. Just another corpse. A chill crawled up my spine. We were numbers, units, raw materials. Beside me, the young man clenched his fists until blood dripped between his fingers. His voice was a strained whisper. They're measuring purity, strength, psychic echo, resonance with the Astronomicon. Some are strong enough to survive the next phase. And the ones who aren't, I already knew. He nodded toward the bodies. Something shattered inside me. The sanctum of needles was not a place of healing. It was a refining chamber, a filter for flesh, a sieve for souls. At some point, I drifted in and out of consciousness. Night dreams twisted around reality. Voices whispering my name in languages I had never heard. Faces I couldn't remember blurred into golden masks. I saw the Emperor not as a statue or icon, but as a silhouette carved from light, impossible to gaze upon directly. Whether it was delirium or something else, I could not say. When I woke again, the chamber lights had dimmed to a faint blue, casting sickly shadows across the walls. The beds around me were emptier. Some fledgling hope tried to rise in my chest, but the emptiness only meant one thing. Bodies moved, not freed. The medici returned with a small cogitator unit strapped to her forearm. She tapped the screen, and her optics glowed faint red as she looked at me. "You are to be transferred. Stand." My legs felt like wet cloth, but I forced them beneath me. Chains were reattached to my wrists, but unlike before, they did not lead me toward a stairwell. Instead, 2 servitors escorted me toward a pair of metal doors at the far end of the chamber. They slid open with a groan, revealing a long corridor illuminated by pale green lumen strips. The young man on the bed called out faintly, "If you make it to the procession, do not speak. Do not look back." I turned, but the servitor shoved me forward, its metal arm pressing between my shoulder blades. The corridor stretched endlessly, its walls lined with polished steel that reflected hollow, ghostly versions of myself. Ahead, a transport platform waited, a hovering lift, silent except for the hum of anti-grav coils. The servitors forced me onto it, then stepped back as the platform shuddered and began to descend. The air grew colder with every meter. The light dimmed. I wrapped my arms around my body, shivering beneath the thin hospital tunic. The descent lasted long enough for fear to rebuild itself inside my chest. Finally, the platform settled on solid ground. The space before me was enormous, a circular chamber, walls rising high into shadowed vaults, lit by columns of bioluminescent crystal. Archways lined the perimeter, each one sealed by heavy gates carved with imperial scripture. A raised dais stood at the center, marked with a blood-stained aquila. Along the outer ring, hundreds of figures waited, still in their tunics, wrists shackled, eyes vacant or wild. Some whispered prayers, others stared blankly at the ceiling. A few simply sobbed, bodies shaking uncontrollably. I was shoved into their ranks. No one spoke. No one dared. After moments of silence that felt like hours, a booming chime rattled the chamber, echoing against stone and steel. The central gate split open, releasing a gust of warm, incense-saturated air. A procession of priests entered first, holding tall staffs topped with burning candles. Shackled psychers walked among them, eyes glazed white, glowing faintly with unnatural light. Behind them came mechanicus adepts pushing carts filled with more instruments, more vials, more needles. Then came the custodians. Their golden armor shone like the sun trapped in metal cages. Every edge razor-sharp, every movement silent and immense. Their presence alone stole the air from our lungs. They did not look at us. They did not acknowledge anything but the path ahead. They marched with the calm inevitability of statues come to life. The priests stopped at the dais. One stepped forward, spreading his arms wide. His voice thundered through hidden amplifiers, rattling in our bones. "These souls have been measured. Their bodies have been tested. Their blood has been drawn and sanctified. Now they walk the sacred road to either rise or be consumed." Somewhere in the crowd, a man broke. He tried to run, chains clattering, voice cracking with terror. A custodian moved without hesitation. He grabbed the man by the throat, lifted him as easily as lifting a child, and snapped his neck with one hand. The body dropped to the floor like refuse. The custodian did not speak. He simply returned to his march. The message was clear. We would go forward, or we would cease to exist. A door opened at the far side of the chamber, revealing a descending ramp lit only by flickering candles. The priest signaled, and the first row of captives began their march. Chains dragged across the floor, echoing down the ramp as they vanished into shadow. When my turn came, my feet felt heavy as stone. I walked, each step a battle between will and despair. The ramp spiraled downward, the light from above fading, until only the candles remained, their flames dancing in the cold draft. The air down here smelled older, dust, oil, drying blood. We reached the bottom and entered a corridor with walls carved from ancient stone. Scriptural markings covered every surface, messages etched by hands centuries dead. The corridor branched in multiple directions, each guarded by priests carrying data slates that projected runes and sigils. Names were checked, groups were separated. I was pushed down a narrow hallway that opened into another chamber. This room was smaller than the Sanctum of Needles, less clinical, more ritualistic. Golden statues lined the walls, depicting warriors, saints, martyrs. Candles burned beside each one, their wax pooling across the stone floor. In the center stood a single metal chair with restraints. A priest gestured to it. I froze. Two servitors grabbed my shoulders, forcing me down, strapping my arms and legs. The metal was cold, the leather biting into my flesh. The medici from before appeared, carrying a syringe filled with the same blue liquid that had broken the woman upstairs. She whispered something, not through the Vox grill, but with her human voice soft and trembling. "Do not resist. It will be worse if you do." Her humanity lasted only a heartbeat before the machine in her returned. The needle entered my neck. Fire surged through my veins. My heartbeat pounded like a thunderstrike. My vision doubled, tripled, then exploded into fragments of color that twisted and bled into one another. Voices cried out from nowhere, overlapping, screaming, praying, whispering secrets I couldn't bear to understand. The world tilted sideways. My head lolled against the chair. The last thing I saw was the Aquila etched into the ceiling. The last thing I felt was my mind trying to hold itself together. Then everything split, open, and darkness swallowed me whole. When awareness returned, it did not arrive gently. It slammed into my skull like the recoil of a bolter, scattering thought into bright, splintering shards. My eyes snapped open to darkness, thick and heavy, pierced only by faint points of red light pulsing along the walls. My head throbbed, and every breath felt like my lungs had been scrubbed with glass. The restraints were gone, but my body ached where each strap had bruised the skin. I tried to sit up. For a moment, my muscles refused to obey, trembling weakly beneath me. Slowly, painstakingly, I pulled myself upright. I stood in a narrow chamber carved from cold black stone. There were no beds, no medici, no machines in sight. Only rows of rusted sconces holding candles that had burned nearly to the wick. Someone had left them as a message or a warning. "You are not meant to stand here long." The walls sweated condensation, thin streams of water running in rivulets that glistened like silver veins. The smell was unlike the antiseptic tang of the sanctum of needles. Here it was older, damp stone, rust, and the lingering copper stink of old blood. For a moment, I wondered if I had died and awakened in some forgotten sub-vault beneath the palace. But the ache in my limbs and the weight in my chest felt too sharp, too real. No, I was alive, harrowingly, miserably alive. Something scraped against the ground nearby. I spun too quickly, dizziness forcing me to steady myself on the rough wall. A figure crouched in the corner, thin, shivering, wrapped in a hospital tunic like mine. When my eyes adjusted, I saw the hollowed cheeks, the bruised arms, the flicker of recognition beneath the fear. One of the chosen. He stared at me, chest rising in frantic, shallow breaths. "They moved us," he said, voice cracking. "They bring us down when we stop screaming." His voice was barely more than a whisper, yet it echoed against the stone as if terrified to disturb something deeper in the dark. "How long have you been awake?" I asked. He shook his head. "Time doesn't mean anything down here. There's no light, no sound. Just waiting." Waiting was worse than pain. Waiting filled the mind with things it could not bear. Before I could ask more, a grinding noise rattled through the chamber. The stone door at the far end slid open, revealing a corridor bathed in flickering torchlight. Shadows stretched across the floor, long and twisted, as robed figures stepped through. Their movements were slow, ceremonial, each step measured. They carried no weapons. They needed none. The man in the corner whimpered and pressed his back against the wall. I did not move. My body was too exhausted to run, and there was nowhere to go. One priest pointed at me. The gesture was smooth, absolute. I was meant to follow. Two others moved toward the crouched man. He screamed, high and fractured, clawing at the floor as they dragged him out. His cries ricocheted through the corridor, bouncing back in broken echoes. The priests did not flinch. They did not speak. They only pulled him into a deeper spiral of darkness, until the sound faded into silence. I stood on shaking legs and followed the one who beckoned. The corridor was cold enough to bite skin, the floor slick with moisture. The chant of distant voices bled into the stone, vibrating through my bones. The priest's footsteps were soft, his robes whispering against the floor. As we walked, other doors slid open, revealing more survivors, some carried by servitors, others herded like cattle. Their faces were masks of fear, eyes sunken with exhaustion. No one spoke. Speaking felt like sacrilege here. Soon the corridor widened, opening into a towering rotunda lit only by candlelight. Hundreds of candles, thousands, lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each flame flickering weakly against the suffocating darkness. For every candle, a name had been carved beneath it in jagged script. Some had burned to stubs, Others flickered with fresh wax. The air stank of melting fat and burning oil. At the center of the rotunda, a procession formed. Rows of the chosen stood shoulder to shoulder, clad in rough tunics, their wrists still bound in front of them. Priests moved among them, chanting in low monotone, pressing holy seals against trembling brows, painting lines of sacred ink across foreheads. Every stroke of the brush marked them with scripture they could not read. A bell tolled, a single heavy strike that shook the chamber. Every priest fell silent at once. From a shadowed arch, a line of custodians emerged, armor glowing like molten gold beneath the candlelight. They formed at the front of the procession, wordless and terrible. The sight of them made every breath smaller, every heartbeat louder. The priest beside me pushed me forward. I stumbled into formation among the others. I could feel their bodies trembling. Some cried silently. Others stared straight ahead, hollow and lost. The custodians turned as one, facing the great obsidian doors across the rotunda. When they moved, their armor made no sound. They were living monuments of perfection, absolute and merciless. The doors opened, no wind rushed out, no light spilled through, only darkness, thick and suffocating, swallowing even the candlelight at the threshold. The chanting resumed, this time rising, layered, voices trembling on the edge of madness. Then we marched. Chains rattled softly, feet shuffled against stone. No one dared speak. The air grew colder with every step, and the candles became fewer, their flames shedding thin, dying light. The corridor we entered felt too narrow for the multitudes it swallowed, yet no walls brushed our shoulders. Space seemed wrong, stretching and shrinking, disorienting. As we descended deeper, the chanting faded. Silence replaced it, a silence so complete it felt alive. I could hear every heartbeat, mine, theirs, the phantom pulse of the stone itself. Someone near the front stumbled. The custodian nearest him turned, golden visor catching what little light remained. The man froze, then continued walking, his movements broken and jerky like a puppet dragged on invisible strings. The passage twisted and dipped, steps worn smooth beneath thousands of feet. The air here was ancient, untouched, heavy with secrets and sorrow. We passed alcoves carved into the walls, each holding statues of saints, martyrs, or unnamed sacrificial figures. Their stone eyes followed us, their mouths parted in eternal agony or prayer, perhaps both. Some statues held scrolls etched with scripture, others held chains, blades, or the broken remains of psychers whose minds had burned out in service to the emperor. After a long descent, the corridor widened into another chamber. This one was circular, like the rotunda, but far larger. A ring of black marble formed the floor, polished so smooth it reflected our faces in distorted fragments. At the chamber's center stood a towering censer suspended from chains as thick as steel beams. It swung slowly, releasing clouds of incense that fell like smoke-laced fog across the floor. The incense burned sweet at first, then bitter, coating the throat like poison. Some coughed, but no one dared stop walking. We circled the chamber, following the custodians as they guided the procession toward another archway. There, a massive iron door awaited, edges engraved with words too old to decipher. A vibration coursed through the floor, low, rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing through ancient machinery. The priests halted. The custodians raised their halberds. Another bell rang, deeper than before. The iron door split open, inch by heavy inch, metal grating like a leviathan waking from slumber. Beyond lay a staircase spiraling into darkness. The first rows of captives descended. By the time we reached the top of the stairs, the chanting behind us had ceased entirely. Only breath and heartbeat remained. The staircase was narrow and steep. The walls dripped moisture, cold streams running across our hands as we steadied ourselves. The air warmed slightly, but not with comfort. It smelled of burning oils and old sorrow. Somewhere below, a distant cry echoed, a scream muffled by stone and distance. The procession did not stop. The stairs ended in a wide landing. Pillars of cracked marble supported a vaulted ceiling carved with faded frescoes, scenes of sacrifice, war, and salvation. Angels and saints knelt before a radiant figure, their bodies entwined in ribbons of light. The paint was chipped and flaked, colors dimmed with centuries. There were more priests here, more devices, more chains. We were shepherded into rows again, this time standing shoulder to shoulder before a massive altar made of obsidian. The altar gleamed with fresh oil. Carved upon its face were names, thousands of them, etched into stone so deeply the grooves bled crimson wax that dripped like tears. A robed figure approached the altar. His robes were stitched with gold thread. His mask shaped into a serene face of polished bronze. When he spoke, his voice was amplified by hidden machinery, booming through the hall like the roar of a titan. You walk the road of faith. You surrender your bodies that humanity may endure. You feed the great beacon that lights the void. Your sacrifice is a prayer made flesh. The hall vibrated with his words, as if the stone itself listened. Know this, the Emperor does not forget. Every drop of blood spilled in his name becomes a spark of his divine purpose. A young woman near me sobbed quietly. She tried to cover her mouth, but the sound escaped. A priest appeared instantly, pressing a hand to her shoulder. He whispered something, too soft to hear. She went silent. Her tears did not stop. The bronze-masked priest raised his arms. Step forward. One by one, those at the front were led onto the altar. The priests worked quickly, binding wrists and ankles, pressing seals of wax to their chests. A mechanized arm descended from the ceiling, cables tipped with needles, humming with energy. When the device activated, the victim's body jerked. Some screamed, others fainted. The machines drained blood into flasks, collected marrow, ripped strands of hair for genetic cataloguing. The priests recorded everything. When each subject collapsed, they were carried away through a side door. No one returned. The line moved slowly, inexorably, swallowing every name, every face. When my turn came, my feet barely obeyed. Two priests led me to the altar, hands pressed firmly against my shoulders, forcing me down. I stared at the black stone beneath me, polished smooth by centuries of sacrifice. Cold chains clamped around my wrists. Leather bit into my ankles. I felt the weight of the scent. Incense, blood, oil. The bronze-masked priest leaned over me. Do not fear, the Emperor accepts your offering. His voice was calm, reverent, beautiful in a way that made me tremble. A machine arm descended. The cables snaked across my chest, needles glinted. For a heartbeat, I thought I might break, thrash, scream, beg, anything. But something in the chamber crushed rebellion. The presence of the custodians, the absolute certainty that death would be instantaneous if I resisted, the knowledge that my voice did not matter here. Pain erupted as the needles pierced my skin. They dug deep, filling my veins with something cold and bright and sickening. My heart raced, pounding against the restraints. Breath tore through my throat. My vision blurred at the edges. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears. Somewhere in the haze, I heard chanting. Soft, melodic, reverent. The priests sang prayers in high Gothic, voices blending with the hum of machinery. The needles withdrew. Blood poured into metal vials, sealing with a hiss. My limbs trembled. My head fell against the stone. Darkness crept along the edges of sight. But instead of unconsciousness, I felt movement. The chains loosened. Servitors lifted me, carrying me from the altar. I drifted in and out of awareness, my body weightless, my mind heavy. I heard doors opening. I smelled cold air. I felt stone beneath my bare feet as they set me down in a narrow corridor. Then I saw them, others like me, lined up against the walls, waiting for the next descent. No one spoke. The procession of silence continued, and we walked onward, deeper still, toward a fate no one could name. The corridor narrowed as we marched, the walls pressing closer with every step as though terror itself sought to swallow us whole. The air shifted, warmer now, weighted with the scent of burning oils and something metallic beneath it. Like hot iron quenched in blood, no one dared to speak, not even in whispers. Our footsteps formed a rhythm of dread, chains clinking in muted counterpoint. Every breath felt sacrilegious, every thought too loud. As we descended, the corridor's stone changed from rough and ancient to polished obsidian, carved with script too intricate for mortal hands. The runes glowed faint gold beneath our feet, pulsing like veins carrying lifeblood into the heart of a slumbering god. The deeper we walked, the more the walls hummed, a low, ceaseless vibration that burrowed into bone. It felt alive. It felt watchful. Eventually, the corridor spat us out into a cavernous chamber so vast the ceiling vanished into shadow. Rows of braziers lined the perimeter, their flames burning blue and white, casting long pillars of ghostly smoke upward where they vanished into darkness. The smoke curled through the air, strangely luminous, as though dusted with powdered starlight. The heat they radiated was uneven. Some braziers burned cold enough to chill the marrow, while others scorched the skin simply by proximity. At the chamber's centre lay a raised platform, round, black-stoned, etched with a great aquila whose wings stretched nearly wall to wall. Every line of the carving was filled with congealed crimson wax, as though it had once been molten blood. Cables descended from the darkness above, thick as serpents, each ending in clamps, needles, or shimmering coils of copper. The cables twitched occasionally, as if tasting the air. Priests waited at the edges of the platform, robes trailing behind them like shrouds. Their masks were different here. No longer simple gold plates, but sculpted faces of martyrs, saints, and angels, expressions frozen in beatific agony. Their hands glowed faintly with electro-etched scripture, circuits of holy ink merging flesh with machine. The first row of captives was guided forward. No ceremony, no blessing. The priests simply gripped them by the arms and hauled them onto the platform. For a heartbeat, the chamber held its breath. Then the offering began. A scream split the silence, raw, human, animal. The sound ricocheted across the chamber, echoing through the vastness until it died against unseen stone. The priests worked methodically, lowering the cables until they writhed around the first victim. Needles sank into flesh, clamps locked around limbs, copper coils tightened around the skull. The machine awoke. Light flared through the cables, blue, gold, and blood red, racing downward into the victim's veins. Their body arched violently, spine bending nearly in half. Their eyes rolled white. The scream choked off, turning into a soundless gape as something invisible dragged the breath from their lungs. Some captives collapsed to their knees. Others stared, unblinking, as if their minds had abandoned their bodies. The custodians stood like statues, halberds planted firmly against the floor, visors reflecting the flicker of tortured bodies like a ceremonial display. Another captive was dragged onto the stone. Another scream. Another burst of light. The chamber of offering was not merely a place of death. It was a conduit, a feeding ground, a ritual pipeline connecting lives to machinery older than memory. Here, sacrifice was not symbolic. It was literal. Blood and soul were taken, processed, turned into something the Imperium needed too desperately to question. The priests chanted as they worked, voices rising and falling in rhythms that did not feel human. The words shifted between High Gothic and Binharic, the language of saints dissolving into the language of machines. The air vibrated with layered frequency, each syllable a blade sliding beneath the ribs of the world. Somewhere deep beneath the chamber, a machine exhaled. The ground trembled, delicate, precise, as though an engine of unimaginable size had stirred. The vibration crawled up our legs and spines, rattling teeth and skulls. I felt it inside my chest. A second heartbeat, not my own. We were being watched, not by eyes, but by something greater. A priest motioned to our row. My feet moved before my brain commanded them to. The chains pulled me forward, every step sinking deeper into inevitability. A woman next to me broke. Her knees buckled, and she screamed, not from pain, but from the terror of knowing exactly what would follow. She begged, voice cracking, words falling apart faster than she could form them. One of the custodians stepped forward, lifting her by the arm with effortless strength. Her cries turned to choking sobs. He placed her gently on the platform, and the priests swarmed her like carrion birds. The cables descended. She writhed, and then the chamber swallowed her voice. My turn came. Hands gripped my arms, cold and unyielding. The priests moved with reverent efficiency, not as sadists, but as men performing sacred duty. Their fingers left smears of wax and oil across my skin. They pressed me onto the aquila, chains locking across my chest and limbs. The stone was hot beneath me, feverish, as though thousands of trapped screams had baked into it over centuries. One priest leaned close enough for his mask to touch my cheek. When he spoke, I felt the vibration through metal instead of hearing with ears. Offer everything, and nothing shall be wasted. The cables stirred, lowering toward me in a slow, predatory descent. The room shrank. The world shrank. There was only the stone, the priests, and the machine. The first needle pierced my arm. White-hot pain lanced upward, racing along nerves like wildfire. My vision blurred. The second needle entered my neck, the third my thigh. Each puncture was a new starburst of agony, a new thread binding me tighter to the machine's hunger. Then the coils wrapped around my skull, cold metal pressed against the base of my spine, at the point where thought became flesh. My jaw trembled. My teeth ground together. Breath left my lungs in a strangled gasp. The machine spoke, not in words, in light. A flood of energy surged into me, too fast, too deep, too violent for human veins. My heart convulsed. Muscles locked. My back arched, dragging at the chains. I screamed, but the sound was torn apart by the roar of my own blood pounding in my ears. Light ignited behind my eyes, blinding, brilliant, unbearable. Shapes moved in that light. Figures, wings, fire, something vast and seated on a golden throne. A silhouette made of radiance and agony, stitched into eternity, half dead and half divine. It watched me with eyes that were not eyes. It reached without moving. It spoke without words. A presence brushed the edges of my mind. Not gentle, not cruel, simply vast. I could not tell if it was real, or if the machine was tearing my consciousness apart and stitching hallucination from the pieces. My thoughts fractured, scattering like broken glass across a void. Every shard seemed to hold a vision, fleets tearing across the stars, war without end, planets burning in silence. I saw cities on worlds I had never heard of, collapsing beneath Xeno's claws and demons' howls. I felt billions die in a single heartbeat, their last prayers ripped upward like sparks toward a single point of golden agony. The machine demanded more. It ripped deeper, clawing through memories, my first breath, my mother's voice, the smell of promethium on cold mornings. Laughter I barely remembered. It stole the small things, the ordinary things, the softness of bread, the warmth of blankets, the simple pleasure of being unseen. I screamed until my voice vanished. The machine did not care. I tried to think of nothing. Emptiness felt safer than remembering. But the machine filled the void with more visions, more light, more hunger, and then, somewhere inside the storm of pain, a whisper. It was not human, not machine. It was prayer. A voice layered across 1,000 others, echoing through the chamber, through the cables, through the stone. We are here. We are many. We do not stop. For a heartbeat, I saw every sacrifice, every soul dragged onto this stone, every scream swallowed by these walls, every offering burned into the veins of the Imperium. We were not individuals. We were fuel. Whether the whisper was real or just my mind breaking, I could not tell. It did not matter. The machine tightened its grip. Light erupted again, brighter this time, tearing another scream from my body. The priests chanted faster, their voices rising in fervor. The cables pulsed brighter, feeding whatever ancient core lay beneath us. And then silence, not the absence of sound. Silence that was presence, a silence that felt like something vast. Pausing to listen, the golden silhouette flickered in the shadows of my mind. Watching with eyes that saw beyond flesh and bone and time, it felt neither mercy nor malice. It simply was. One heartbeat, two. Then the machine released me. The needles retracted. The coils unwound. Chains unlocked and fell limp beside me. My body collapsed against the stone, every muscle trembling. I could feel my pulse thundering in my fingertips, in my skull, in my teeth. Breath returned in ragged gasps, tearing the inside of my throat. A priest checked my eyes with gloved fingers. His voice filtered through the mask, flat and clinical. Survived. 2 servitors lifted me by the arms and dragged me from the platform. My feet scraped the floor. The chamber spun in dizzying spirals. I realized dimly that others watched me as I passed. Those still waiting, those already broken, those who prayed for death. I wanted to speak, to warn them, to scream at them, to run. But my tongue was heavy, my voice gone. We were led toward a smaller archway at the far side of the chamber. The stone beneath us vibrated in slow waves, like a heartbeat sinking back into slumber. Behind us, the offering continued. Another captive took my place. Another scream burned the air. Inside the archway, a narrow passage waited. Cold stone, low ceiling, dim light. The servitors dropped me without care. My knees hit the floor. I swallowed blood. My vision flickered. Around me, others crawled or lay sprawled against the walls. Some stared blankly. Some wept. Some whispered prayers to gods who had long abandoned them. The chamber of offering continued to feast, and we, the ones not yet dead, lay in the corridor like spent candles, waiting for whatever came next. No one spoke. The silence was everything, and forward was the only direction left. There is a place beneath terror where sound does not travel as it should, where whispered prayers die the moment they touch the air, and where a man's thoughts echo louder than his voice. That was where they sent us next. The corridor of the offering narrowed into a passage of polished stone, each slab carved with scripture, so old the characters had worn smooth. The walls glistened with condensation, as though the mountain itself was sweating under the weight of what lay deeper below. Servitors guided us forward, their motions slow and patient, like beings who had forgotten what time meant. Their eyes burned with pale light, devoid of curiosity. With every step, the air grew warmer, thick with incense so dense it felt like a shroud settling across the lungs. After the fury of the offering chamber, this silence was worse. The screams had been replaced by stillness. A stillness so absolute that we began to hear smaller things. The tremor in our own breathing, the faint tick of machinery pulsing behind the walls, and the distant thrum of something vast and ancient powering beneath our feet. Some among us tried to whisper to one another, but even hushed voices fractured, thinning into nothing. It was as though the corridor swallowed sound just as it swallowed light. Fear became internal, thoughts became prisons. Eventually the passage opened into a chamber so enormous that its far walls vanished into shadow. Rows of iron platforms stretched outward, each one connected by thick conduits and suspended cables that disappeared into the darkness above. Golden statues of saints and martyrs lined the edges of the hall, their faces lifted toward the unseen heights, eyes closed in eternal devotion. Their expressions were carved with such pained serenity that one could almost imagine they were breathing. Priests waited there, silent, unmoving, their robes pooled at their feet like spilled ink. Their masks were shaped into serene visages, eyes half-lidded as though in somber contemplation. They did not greet us. They simply watched as the servitors positioned us along the platforms. When my hands brushed the cold metal surface, a shock of realization pierced through the numbness. Whatever happened here was not meant for observation. The offering had been public, ritualized, witnessed. This chamber was different. There were no braziers of blue flame, no chanting to drown thought. Here, the silence itself was ritual. The platforms lifted, not fast enough to unbalance us, but steadily, ascending into the darkness above. The room slowly dropped away beneath us until the chamber floor became a distant smear of shadow. Metal groaned underfoot, and for a fleeting moment, I feared the entire structure would snap, sending us falling into whatever abyss lay below. But the machinery held, moving with the inevitability of a duty carried out millions of times before. As we rose, faint points of gold began to shimmer in the distance, like stars flickering into existence. 1 became 2, 2 became 5, and soon the darkness ahead was crowded with a constellation of dim, gilded shapes. At first they seemed distant. Then, as the platforms drifted closer, the shapes resolved into forms, vast, towering machines wrought in ancient gold. I had seen statues of the Golden Throne in murals, in shrines, in worn ink on torn parchment. I had seen its silhouette burned into banners, carved into cathedral doors. But I had never imagined the scale of the devices that fed it, the arteries of metal and prayer that carried offerings from the depths of terror toward its eternal seat. The platforms halted at the base of a monumental structure, a network of conduits, golden ribs and cathedral pillars fused with machinery so old its surface had become smooth as glass. Symbols glowed faintly beneath the metal, shifting in gentle pulses that made the skin crawl. The machine was not cold. It was warm, as if alive. Priests appeared once more, stepping onto the platforms with gliding precision. They carried slender rods of polished gold, each tipped with a needle of shimmering crystal. When they raised them, the faint light caught at the tips and refracted into a halo of sharp brilliance. They moved among us, heads bowed, movements solemn. One approached me. His mask was shaped like the face of a saint, serene and mournful. Without a word, he lifted the golden needle and placed it lightly against my temple. I did not flinch, though every muscle begged me to step back. A soft chime sounded. The crystal glowed. For a moment, nothing happened at all. Then the world sharpened. The air felt clearer, although I could not breathe deeper. The shadows bent in strange ways around the machine, as though light and darkness could not agree on where they belonged. In the periphery of my vision, the chamber seemed to lengthen, stretching impossibly far. The priests walked from platform to platform, and the space shifted around them, leaving no footprints of sound. The machine, whatever part of the throne's network this was, began to hum. Not loudly, not violently. It was the kind of sound that slipped beneath hearing, felt not in the ears but in the bones. A low pulse, steady and ancient, like the breathing of something titanic and exhausted, but still clinging to life. Somewhere in that humming, thoughts that were not my own stirred at the edges of perception. Not words, impressions, weight, distance. Cold stars flickering in a void so vast the mind recoiled. A sense of motion, of ships gliding through the silent dark. The faint, impossible feeling of something pushing outward, holding chaos at bay. The priests stepped back as one. Their rods dimmed. The light faded. On the far side of the platform, a custodian guard watched us, halberd planted beside his feet. His armor gleamed softly beneath the golden circuitry of the machine, reflections dancing across the curved plates like fragments of captured sunlight. He did not speak. He did not acknowledge our existence. His silence was absolute, but there was presence in it. An unspoken decree that whatever happened here was beyond judgment, beyond emotion, beyond mercy. A priest raised his hand. The platforms moved again, guiding us deeper into the machine's heart. The path tightened, metal pillars closing around us like colossal ribs. Faint lights pulsed underfoot, mapping ancient pathways carved long before any of us were born. The platforms glided along tracks, passing beneath arches, inscribed with scripture so old the characters had been worn down to mere shadows. We entered a long hall, lined with translucent capsules, each one rising from floor to ceiling. Some were empty, others held still shapes, shrouded in veils of pale light, motionless as statues. Whether they slept, meditated, or existed in some sacred suspension, I could not tell. No faces were visible, only faint silhouettes behind glass. Rumors in the hive had carried stories like this. Whispers that some chosen never died, but were woven into the machinery of the throne. Their minds stretched thin across the void, guiding ships through the warp without ever opening their eyes again. No one ever knew if those tales were truth or frightened imagination. Here, looking at those silent forms, rumor felt indistinguishable from reality. The platforms halted once more. The priests gathered before a tall archway sealed in stone. They formed a circle, each raising their rod of gold. Pale light blossomed from the tips until the entire arch was bathed in a gentle radiance. For a heartbeat, the stone seemed to ripple like water, its solidity unraveling. Then it parted. A new chamber lay beyond. It was smaller, more intimate, if such a word could exist in a place so utterly devoid of comfort. Stone benches lined the walls. Vox altars flickered with slow-burning incense. At the center stood a dais shaped like a circle, marked with thin grooves that spiraled inward. One of the priests pointed. We were guided toward the dais in small groups, each of us taking position along the outer ring. Our feet fit perfectly into shallow depressions carved into the stone, as though thousands had stood in these same places before. The grooves beneath us glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the distant machinery. The priest raised his voice, soft but carrying perfectly through the silence. You stand where countless souls have stood. You are not alone, though the path before you is walked without answer. What awaits you is purpose, and purpose is never wasted. His hand traced a circle in the air, and the dais responded, humming beneath our feet. The grooves brightened, lines of light converging toward the center until the entire stone surface shimmered with an ethereal glow. Something changed in the air. Pressure, like a presence leaning closer. My breath trembled. My hands shook. I felt weight settle behind my eyes. A heaviness that was not pain but expectancy. A whisper brushed the edge of consciousness. It was not speech, not sound, more like the idea of a voice pressing against the mind. Someone staggered beside me. Another clutched their head. The priest did not move. The dais brightened again, and then everything dissolved. Not in darkness, not in pain, but in light. For a moment that stretched beyond understanding, there was nothing but brilliance, cold, silent, infinite. Stars spun like grains of dust in a storm. Worlds flickered and faded. Somewhere, a great beacon pulsed in the void, calling out across a sea of madness and shadow. Something answered, not with voice, but with existence, ancient and eternal. The vision, or whatever it was, fractured. Light cracked like glass hit by a hammer. A rush of wind roared in my ears, though no wind touched my skin. I felt motion, or the memory of motion, or a dream of motion. When it ended, the light simply died. The chamber returned. The dais darkened. The pressure vanished, leaving only the eerie quiet. I stood trembling, palms cold and slick. The others swayed on their feet, some weak-kneed, some staring blankly as though thought had slipped from their grasp. The priests watched us with unreadable stillness. Those who remained standing were guided toward another archway, narrower, darker, framed in gold that dulled in the low light. The priests did not explain. They did not congratulate or dismiss. They simply directed us onward, as if our fates had been decided by forces beyond their understanding. The platforms lowered, carrying us toward the new corridor. Behind us, the chamber of offering hummed on, hungry and eternal. Ahead, the path wound deeper still, toward the very arteries of the throne. No one knew if we were being elevated or consumed. No one dared to ask. And somewhere far above, beneath the palace of gold and endless banners, the Emperor's light continued to burn, not warm, not kind, but vast and unyielding, a silent star at the heart of a dying galaxy. The corridor narrowed again, but this time it was not carved from stone. The walls were made of towering metal latticework, veins of gold and copper intertwined like the roots of some ancient mechanical tree. Light pulsed within the wiring, slow, steady, the heartbeat of something impossibly vast. We walked single file, guided by servitors whose movements carried none of the urgency of mortals. They drifted like phantoms, blank-eyed and emotionless, hearing commands we could not. The air grew thin, breath came harder. Somewhere far above, machinery turned with solemn precision, each rotation heavy with the weight of centuries. The smell changed too, less of incense, more of ionized metal and ozone, as if lightning had passed through recently and refused to leave. No one spoke. Silence was no longer imposed. It was the only language left. At the end of the corridor stood a gate wrought from gold and obsidian, its surface etched with scripture too fine for mortal carving. The words shimmered as we drew closer, catching the faint light in shifting patterns. Two figures waited before it, tall as custodians, but draped not in armor, but in robes of pure white that seemed untouched by dust or time. Their masks were smooth discs of polished gold, featureless and perfect. They raised their hands in unison. The gate parted without a sound. Beyond it lay a chamber unlike any other we had seen. It was vast, but not empty. From floor to ceiling, crystalline structures rose like pillars of frozen light. Some stood silent, glowing faintly from within. Others hummed, their surfaces flickering with bands of gold and red. Between them stretched a web of thin filaments, so delicate they should have snapped beneath a breath, yet they thrummed with energy that made the air vibrate. At first, I thought the structures were simply machines. It was easier that way. But as my eyes adjusted to the light, I realized the truth. There were people inside them, suspended, motionless, preserved in crystalline cocoons so clear they might as well have been ice. Some looked peaceful as though sleeping. Others wore expressions caught between ecstasy and terror, their faces frozen in silent scream or whispered prayer. Their bodies were not bound, not pierced, not broken, but their stillness was worse than suffering. It felt like finality, disguised as devotion. A low hum rolled across the chamber, a chord of many voices speaking without breath or speech. It seeped into the bones, into the teeth, into the spaces between thoughts. It was not painful. It was not gentle. It simply was, like gravity or the passing of time. Someone near me whispered, "The choir." They didn't need to explain. Even without words, I understood. We all did. Every child in the hive heard stories of the Astronomicon, of the great psychic beacon that pierced the warp and guided Imperial vessels across the abyss. Few believed they would ever see the machinery that supported it. Fewer still imagined it would look like this. A priest stepped forward, robe trailing across the polished metal floor, with a whisper that vanished as soon as it was born. His mask bore no features, just a smooth oval of white porcelain that reflected the crystalline pillars. "You witness the choir of the unseen," he said. His voice was neither loud nor soft, but perfectly clear, as though the air itself carried every syllable. "Their minds are threads in the great tapestry of the Astronomicon. They see without eyes, they speak without tongues. Their devotion holds the Imperium together." He gestured toward the nearest crystalline pillar. A faint pulse of light flowed through it, racing upward like breath drawn by a sleeper. "They do not die," the priest continued. "They are not abandoned. They dwell in perpetual communion. The Emperor's presence, shaping their thoughts, their dreams, their every moment." A shiver passed through the group. Some looked at the choir with awe, others with dread. Neither reaction mattered. Choice had left us long ago. The priest motioned again, and servitors guided us deeper between the crystalline pillars. The further we walked, the more intense the humming became. Words began to dissolve in my mind, replaced by a sense of distance so vast it became abstract. The warp, the void, endless night flecked with distant stars. The pillars here were older. Their surfaces were clouded, their light dimmer. Within them, the shapes of those preserved seemed faded, as though time had thinned them into silhouettes. One pillar flickered faintly, its light trembling like a candle struggling against the wind. For a moment, the figure inside shifted, or seemed to. The betrayal of sight and imagination blurred together. The priests did not react, which was somehow more unnerving than if they had. We reached a clearing in the center of the chamber. A circular platform rose from the floor, carved from black marble laced with veins of radiant gold. Above it, the web of filaments converged into a single point, an orb of pale light suspended like a star held in place by chains of energy. The orb pulsed slowly. Each pulse made the floor vibrate. The sound was not heard, but felt deep beneath the ribs. A priest, older than the others, judging by the weight of his robes and the intricate bronze filigree twisting across his mask, ascended the platform. He lifted his arms, and the hum of the choir shifted, aligning into a single harmonious note. "You stand at the threshold of eternity," he said. "The Emperor's light touches all who serve. Even now, threads of your thoughts reach toward him, though you do not yet hear them." The orb brightened. The platform trembled. Without instruction, we stepped forward. Not by command, by gravity of purpose, the air thickened, warmed, pressed against the skin like unseen hands. My heartbeat quickened, synchronizing with the hum of the choir. When the orb flared again, it did not produce light in the ordinary sense. It created visions, fleeting, symbolic, impossible to describe. Cities of gold drifting above oceans of fire, fleets crossing a void filled with silent storms. A throne of unimaginable brilliance, shadowed by wings of iron and faith. The Emperor's presence, distant, silent, eternal, felt like a pressure in the skull, like a name spoken not to ears, but to the soul. My knees trembled. Others swayed. The platform absorbed it all, transmitting every breath, every heartbeat, every fragment of thought into the filaments above. For one impossible second, the choir's voices sharpened. Thoughts not my own brushed the edge of consciousness. Millions of minds stretched thin, woven into one another like a tapestry of glass threads. They did not speak. They existed, knowing, seeing, burning. The priest's voice cut through the haze. "Some among you will remain. Some will ascend to the throne's greater machinery. Others will return above, their part fulfilled." Return. The word hit harder than any blow. No one had spoken of return before. It felt like a myth, a story told to children to ease their sleep. And yet the priest had said it with certainty, not as comfort, but as fact. One of the captives near me sank to the floor, hands covering his face. Not from pain, from hope. A dangerous thing in this place. Servitors moved forward, their metal hands gentle as they lifted him. The priest watched without visible reaction. "Those who return carry fragments of truth," he said. "They do not speak of what they have seen, for mortal tongue cannot shape such things. But the Imperium endures by their survival, just as it endures by the sacrifice of those who do not leave these halls." The orb dimmed. The platform stilled. The choir faded to a soft, distant hum. A silence fell, not empty, but contemplative. The priest lowered his arms. "You will rest now. When the machinery calls, you will answer." We were led away from the platform, carried along narrow walkways between the crystalline pillars. Some captives walked with steady steps, others trembled, a few stared blankly, eyes unfocused, as though their thoughts had wandered somewhere far beyond flesh. The chamber's far end revealed a series of alcoves, small, stone-lined recesses filled with cots and thin blankets. Nothing of luxury, nothing of comfort, but after the corridors of stone and the machinery's cold embrace, the sight of a place to lie down felt unreal. I sank onto a cot. The stone beneath the thin mattress was warm, not from heat, but from the machinery beyond it. The hum of the choir vibrated through the walls, a lullaby older than language. Some captives curled beneath their blankets at once. Others sat upright, staring into space, afraid that sleep would steal what little control they still possessed. A woman across from me murmured a prayer, soft, fractured, half forgotten. Another captive stared at her with hollow eyes, as though he envied her ability to form words at all. I lay back slowly, muscles trembling with exhaustion I had not realized was growing. The hum beneath the stone was rhythmic, steady, almost comforting. My eyes drifted closed. In the space between waking and sleep, I saw flashes, not visions forced by machines, but memories. A sky lit by dawn, the smell of bread from a street vendor, a child laughing, a name I could barely remember, like something written on parchment that had been left in rain too long. Sleep claimed me, but even in dreams, the choir's voices followed, soft, distant, eternal. Sometimes singing, sometimes weeping, sometimes both at once. We were beneath terror, deeper than maps dared reveal, closer to machinery that should not be seen. But for the first time, a strange whisper of possibility curled through the suffocating darkness. Some would return, some would walk beneath open sky. Again, if the Emperor willed it, if their minds remained their own, if the choir did not claim them first, and in that fragile hope, sleep swallowed us whole, while the machinery of the Astronomicon kept its silent vigil above. When I woke, I did not know how long I had slept. The air in the alcove was still and heavy, carrying a faint warmth that seeped up through the stone floor. Somewhere beyond the walls, machinery thrummed with slow heartbeat rhythm, steady as the turning of ancient gears. The choir's distant voices murmured like wind moving through glass. It was not a sound one grew used to, but it was no longer something my mind rejected. It had become a part of thought itself, something heard even when silence seemed absolute. Around me, others stirred. Some rose, shoulders bowed, eyes hollow with sleepless dreaming. Others remained motionless, staring at the ceiling as though listening for commands that had not yet arrived. A woman near the entrance knelt with hands clasped, murmuring prayers so quietly that only her lips moved. Whether they were answered was not for any mortal to know. Servitors waited in the doorway, patient as ever. Their eyes glowed faintly, pale pinpoints of cold intention. Without a spoken order, we understood what came next. Rest was never a gift here. It was preparation. Rest meant there would soon be purpose again. We followed them through another corridor, this one narrower, with low arches forcing us to bow our heads. The walls were lined with golden panels engraved with faded depictions of saints ascending toward radiant thrones. The images were beautiful, but every face bore a trace of strain, as if holiness was a weight no mortal bone could endure. A faint breeze brushed my cheek. It startled me, real air moving freely, not recycled by subterranean engines. The scent carried dust, stone, and something bright, impossible to define. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, unlike any we had seen. It was dim but not dark. The ceiling arched high above, supported by columns carved like angelic forms, whose wings curled upward to meet the stone. Between the columns stood great windows of quartz, hazy and opaque, but enough to let light pass through. We gasped, not loudly, not dramatically, but in quiet disbelief. Sunlight, pale and filtered through layers of stone and mineral, but sunlight all the same. We had descended for so long that the memory of the surface felt mythical. Yet here, beneath the weight of terror itself, sunlight found a way to breathe into the darkness. The chamber floor was tiled with black marble veined with gold. Vox altars lined the walls, flickering with soft blue script. Between them were long stone benches and low tables carved with the aquila. It looked like a place built for reflection, or for waiting. A custodian stood near the central column. His armor seemed brighter here, as though it absorbed every stray strand of light and shaped it around his form. When he spoke, his voice rolled through the chamber like a decree carved into steel. "You will be seen." He lifted his halberd. Another set of doors opened. We entered another hall, smaller, quieter, lit by braziers that burned with smokeless white fire. Priests in ivory robes stood waiting, each holding a data slate. None spoke. They simply watched, heads tilted slightly, as if measuring the shape of our thoughts. One priest pointed to me. A servitor guided me toward a narrow archway. Beyond it lay a smaller chamber, round and windowless, with a single seat of polished obsidian in its center. I sat. The door closed behind me with a soft hiss. Silence fell. Thick, complete, suffocating. Then a light flickered above, dim at first, then growing until the chamber glowed faintly gold. It was not harsh, not blinding. It was warm, gentle, almost kind. A robed figure stepped into the light. Unlike the priest seen before, this one wore no mask. His face was human, aged, lined with years, eyes tired but clear. There were scars at his temples where metal met flesh, as though implants had been added long ago and later removed. He regarded me with a steady gaze. "You are far beneath the Imperial Palace," he said softly, voice unhurried, deeper than most will ever imagine. "Few see this place, fewer remember." His words were not reassuring, but they were not cruel. "You endured the offering. You stood in the choir's presence. You reached the threshold and did not break." My throat felt dry. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we see what remains." He lifted a small device from his sleeve. It was shaped like a pendant, etched with sigils that glowed faintly when his fingers touched it. He held it between us. The light shimmered, almost like water, then settled. "You are not here to be destroyed. You are not here to be forgotten. All who come beneath terror serve a purpose. Some remain in silence. Others ascend toward tasks that cannot be named." His eyes searched mine. "Tell me what you remember, not of pain, not of fear, but of what lay beyond." I tried to speak, but language felt clumsy. Images flickered in my mind. Stars, void, a throne of impossible brilliance, the whisper of thoughts not my own. The warp stretched like an ocean into forever, and humanity clung to a beacon made of devotion and sacrifice. "I saw distance," I whispered. "Endless distance." He nodded. "And in that distance?" "Light," I said. "A light that does not fade." His expression did not change, but something in the room shifted. A tension, an expectation. "You are not the first to say this. You will not be the last." Some imagine what they need to believe. Others glimpse fragments of truth. His voice lowered. "Which one were you?" I did not answer. I could not. He did not expect me to. He stepped back, touching a rune on the wall. The chamber dimmed. The door opened. "You will be moved now," he said. "Your mind has endured much. Rest will come again. Purpose will follow." Servitors guided me out. I returned to the sunlight chamber. Others had already been seated at the stone tables, food placed before them. Thin wafers of nutrient paste and cups of clear water. Simple, unadorned, but real. Hunger stirred for the first time in days. We ate in silence. Hours passed. No one spoke. No one asked. We had learned that questions did not change answers. Eventually, priests returned. They called us by number, not by name. Some were led back toward the crystalline choir. Others toward deeper corridors where machinery pulsed in steady rhythm. When my number was spoken, I stood with numb obedience. A priest in white robes beckoned me. His mask was shaped like a calm face, eyes narrowed in contemplation. This way. We passed through another archway, this one narrower, dimmer, the air cooler. The corridor twisted like a serpent, descending again. The stone underfoot became smoother, polished by centuries of ritual tread. A faint light glowed at the corridor's end. The priest halted before a door made of black marble, veined with copper circuitry. "Within this chamber," he said softly, "you will wait." I stepped inside. The chamber was small, circular, lit by a single candle whose flame did not flicker despite the drafts of subterranean air. A simple cot sat against the wall. A vox altar hummed quietly beside it, displaying no text, just a steady pulse of blue light. The priest did not follow. The door shut behind me. For a long time I stood in silence. The machinery beyond the walls murmured like distant thunder. The choir's voices echoed faintly, rising and falling in slow rhythm. At moments, I thought I heard words. At others, Only the vibration of minds stretched thin across the void. Exhaustion returned, deep and irresistible. I lay on the cot. The candle's flame cast soft shadows that danced across the ceiling like wings. Sleep crept in. But before it claimed me, something changed. Not sound, not sight, a sensation, like a thought pressing gently against the mind's edge, familiar yet distant. The memory of light, of stars, of impossible distance. It did not hurt. It did not command. It simply waited, like a door left open in a silent house. For a moment, I wondered if I was truly alone. The candle dimmed. Darkness edged the corners of vision. And then, a voice. Not heard. Felt, a whisper without language, carried on the breath of eternity. We endure. The chamber disappeared, not in pain, not in fear, in warmth, golden warmth, stretching through every memory I had ever owned. I felt weightlessness, or something like it, as though thought and breath had been unbound from flesh. Images flickered, too bright, too vast, too impossible to hold. Fleets cutting through warp storms, planets beneath twin suns, a palace of unending gold beneath a sky filled with silent banners. The vision broke. I gasped, sitting upright. The chamber returned. The candle still burned, but something was different. The air felt lighter, the hum of the choir fainter, as though receding. Footsteps approached. The door opened. A custodian stood there, silent and solemn, armor reflecting candlelight in shifting patterns. He regarded me for a long moment, visor unreadable. "Rise," he said. His voice was not harsh. It carried weight, but also certainty. I stood. "You will leave this place," he said. "Your purpose here is complete." My breath caught. "Leave?" He nodded once. "There are those who remain. There are those who ascend deeper. And there are those who return to the Imperium, bearing no memory but carrying something far greater." He turned, motioning for me to follow. I stepped into the corridor. The choir's hum faded behind us, swallowed by distance. Passageways opened into broader halls. We ascended stairs carved from gleaming white stone. The air grew cooler, cleaner. The scent of incense replaced the metallic taste of machinery. After what felt like hours, we entered a long, narrow gallery lit by tall, stained windows. Light spilled across the floor in fractured colors, red, gold, blue, painting the marble in shifting patterns. The ceiling soared above like the ribcage of a titan. Angels carved from alabaster gazed down with serene, sorrowful eyes. We walked until the gallery ended at a single door. The custodian placed a hand against it. The metal parted with a whisper. Beyond was a balcony. Open air brushed my face. Cold, sharp, real. The sky above was pale morning blue, clouds drifting like solemn banners. The city of terror stretched beneath the horizon, a labyrinth of spires and cathedrals, manufactorums and shrines, all bowing toward the gleaming heart of the imperial palace. I stepped onto the balcony. The sunlight touched my skin, gentle as a blessing. The custodian stood behind me. "You will speak of nothing," he said. "Not because you cannot, but because what lies beneath terror needs no voice. The Imperium moves forward because millions walk paths they do not remember." He paused. "But you will know this. You served, not in vain, not forgotten." His words settled like heavy cloth. A transport awaited at the terrace below, its engines idle, its aquila painted in deep gold. Servitors stood beside the ramp. A single priest waited there, his robe fluttering in the wind. I turned once more to the custodian. "What was I?" I whispered. He inclined his head. "A citizen of the Imperium," he said. "A soul given to the light that guides humanity across the stars. Nothing more, nothing less." There was no ceremony, no farewell, no grandeur, just the wind, the sky, and the quiet of a world far too immense for any one life to fathom. I descended the stairs and boarded the transport. As the hatch sealed, the engines whispered to life. The city rose beneath us, vast, unending, ancient. The palace of gold glimmered in the distance, windows blazing like captured stars. Somewhere beneath it, the choir sang on. Somewhere deeper still, the throne waited. My memories would blur. The machinery ensured that faces would fade, voices would soften. Days would pass without shape, but a single truth remained, bright as a shard of light lodged in the heart. We endure. Not because we are strong, because there is no other path. The transport carried me away, into the endless expanse of Terra's skyline, while the fortress palace behind us held its silent vigil over a dying galaxy, kept alive by those who served and never spoke of their offering. And like countless before me, I vanished into the world above, one forgotten thread in the tapestry that held humanity together beneath the burning light of the Golden Throne.